Alright, welcome everybody. That's Debatable, and today we're going to be discussing a little bit about what we talked about in the last episode with Nietzsche. And essentially, is there a point to living without a god? So, we have our faithful guest Morefreeus on, my co-host Triboulet-The Humanist, and of course I'm Fantastic Facade. Chat is live up on the screen, so if you guys have any questions, comments, if you want us to shout out something, just let us know there. If you have any questions you want us to answer, we try to get to those live on show. And before we take off, let's go ahead and get our plug to Relic Media in there. So Triboulet, take it away.
Yeah, Relic Media is a new streaming service for podcasts. If you have a new podcast, you have a really small audience, or you want to help it grow, hit up Relic Media. We can get you in touch, and you can be part of the Relic Media family.
Awesome. So where do we want to start?
Yeah, I think Morpheus, you said you wanted to had, I guess, discuss some presuppositions that you had coming into the conversation or previous conversations.
Oh yeah, I think the Nietzsche topic is a great topic. I just thought that maybe for the first maybe 15, 20 minutes, we haven't really had a discussion on just the general topic of debating and discourse in general.
Okay.
And I feel like, I took some things for granted. There's often times where like we don't have time when we're debating to actually stop and talk through the mechanics of things. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would be a good idea to just kind of talk through, hold up real quick. Talk through the what I guess my understanding in general. I can just start off, and then maybe you can do 5 minutes, and then we can get to the Nietzsche topic. But I just thought we haven't taken the time out to really talk through debating. So I'll just give a quick spiel, and then I'll hand it over to you, and then maybe we can go through some of the common fallacies or common tactics that people use on the left and right, and in media in general, to try to make it seem as if the truth is on their side when in fact no one really knows the truth in some cases, or maybe they do.
Sure.
Just as a upfront kind of. So to me, discourse and debate stems from, I would say my understanding of like the first foot forward for Western philosophy was a person that nobody really knows if he really existed. He was referenced in Plato's dialogues, but his name was Socrates. And the kind of one big contribution that Socrates had, among other things, displaying his ability to use the Socratic method to find people's limits to their knowledge. He said that, one of his famous quotes is, "The only thing I know is I know nothing." And so what that means is he's constantly questioning everything, even the things that he's so convinced of. And I've tried to hold that close to my heart, ever since I learned that little, quote back when I was, I don't know, 18 or 19. In other words, you have to argue for truth. No one's going to say that you shouldn't argue for some form of truth. But at the end of the day, a real philosopher, a real intellectual has to be willing to say they're wrong and be willing to accept the evidence of the opposing argument. So these debates and in this discourse, we've obviously covered various different topics, but one thing I would say there's probably 2 or 3 main issues that when we get into debates, we tend to come across. And that's where the contention is. And so I just wanted to kind of shine a light on that. And that way, so some of the viewers maybe in the future, they get somewhat of a standard of what we're looking for. But so I'll just start with some common issues when we come into debates, okay? And then I'll hand it over to you guys. You guys can just kind of expound on this. But one of the issues that I've experienced in these debates, and also you see all the time, is a difference in definition, a difference in how we define our terms. And that is an easily that is an easy slippery slope to a straw man argument, because if the opposing side, let's say, is arguing off of a different definition of terms, it's going to look like a straw man where they're attacking an argument that you didn't make. That's a common thing that happens here. I don't know that we mean to do it intentionally. I think it's genuinely just us having a difference of definition on specific terms. And then also, I think the other kind of contention that we run into is, at what layer are we discussing a specific issue? Because like, you can take one issue and you could probably break it into, like, I don't know, a lot of layers. Let's just say 10 layers. If I'm speaking on it, if I'm making a comment on, let's say, um, gender or ideology, but I'm making the comment from the perspective of policy, that's a different conversation. That's a different layer than the perspective of, say, moral philosophy, right? And you could get those two conflated. You can you could listen to me and say he's making a moral argument or a moral statement, but in fact, I'm making a policy statement. Now, layers also have overlap, obviously, right? You could easily find yourself in one layer, which is policy, and find a connective, let's say, connective tissue to the moral layer. And then you'd have to jump into that layer to defend the outcome or the consequence of that specific claim you're making from the moral layer. And so I think that's another contention that we run into oftentimes is you're looking at it from a you're looking at it from a specific perspective or context that you've defined in your head, but have not necessarily defined it in public, or made it aware to the people debating or discussing. I've done the same thing. It's easy to do because you take it for granted because you're the one thinking of the idea in your head, and you think that they understand. But anyway, um, what's some other stuff? Those are two big ones that I see. Cherry picking. That's another one that you see oftentimes in these debates, whether it be the right or the left. They take a multivariate analysis and they only look at one variable, and that's a flaw in reasoning, because you have to look at causation. Sometimes you have to look at correlation between your argument, but oftentimes you really want to target causation, and it's easy to conflate those two. That's kind of an error that is oftentimes made in these really complex topics, because you can point to one specific. When I say point to, you can cherry pick one specific variable out of a set of variables, and then make a what's the best word for it? A valid deduction from that, because you've only isolated your series of variables to one specific variable. So cherry picking is just, you could take any statistic and really any claim to a certain degree, and you can position yourself to an advantageous position by isolating one variable and being biased towards others, and also cherry picking. And then you guys have brought up the bandwagon fallacy in the past, which is making a claim about making a truth claim and using a majority of folks to support that claim. I think you had mentioned in a text that you could also use the minority. Is that true? I think the bandwagon implies the majority, but
The long and the short is, it doesn't have to be, when I say majority or using a minority, it doesn't have to be a large group of people per se. It just has to be a majority of the people saying it. So, for instance, in my text, I mentioned that if you work in a group of 40 people and 30 of them say that we should do this one thing, and you just say, yeah, that's a great idea, but you don't actually put critical thinking or critical thought into it, that's a bandwagon. Like, what you've done is you've jumped on the bandwagon because you haven't actually put effort or critical thinking into that decision. So it may be the right decision, it may be the wrong decision, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that you've just gone with what the crowd says. And
right,
that's
you
the
can't use
bandwagon
it
fallacy.
for.
It doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right or wrong decision, or that a majority of people in the world believe it. It just means a majority of people in your specific instance say this, and you're just saying it because that's what the majority in your group is saying. So bandwagon fallacy typically happens when you have, like, for instance, if you're at an if you're employed at a certain location and 30 people at your work come up to you and they tell you this one thing and that this is what we're going to do, and you're like, that's a great idea, but you didn't actually think about what the outcome or consequences are, what you've done is you've just come to the bandwagon fallacy. It wasn't intentional, but because a majority of the people that you work with in this instance, even though it's only a group of 30, you can still succumb to that kind of fallacy. Whereas if you're talking about something like on a global scale, it's much harder to say it's a bandwagon fallacy, a true bandwagon fallacy, because not, more than half the world's going to agree on pretty much anything. It's just, if you jump onto a cause without having a good critical thought, or if you're unable to defend a thought behind why you agree with something because XYZ says it, or because a large group of people believe it, or because a large group promotes it, you're potentially subject to a bandwagon fallacy.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think that that is kind of closely related to, what's it called?
Probably you thinking appeal to authority.
What was that?
I don't worry.
Yeah. Appeal to authority. That's the other.
Yeah, well, that's
yeah. So it's like, oh, well, because so and so professor, or because
Brian Greene,
yeah, exactly, or because Neil deGrasse Tyson, or because Stephen Hawking, or because the Bible, or because the Quran, or because so and so says so. You don't have to defend it. It's just true. And that's
right.
Appeal to authority. You're saying that because some other source says so, it is so, and it's very, very along the same lines of thinking as bandwagon, except instead of having a bunch of people saying it, you have one person or one authority source for your reasoning. So instead of being able to defend something, you just say, oh, well, so-and-so said it's true. It doesn't matter. It's true.
Right.
I want to add the caveat, though. You can appeal to an authority if it's actually an authority. Right. So if I say you were speeding and you ask me, like, well, how do you know that? And I cite the law. That isn't a fallacy. That is a legitimate appeal to authority. So the appeal to authority fallacy is really only committed when you appeal to something that's not an actual authority. And it gets really complicated with things like I see, like with like things like on. I don't want to get too political here because I still want to get to the Nietzsche thing.
Let's not go political. Let's go religious instead. I have a good example.
Okay.
Like, people appeal to the authority of like Richard Dawkins, the scientist, when it comes to like philosophical or religious arguments.
Yeah, so stuff like that.
It's a really bad idea.
Yeah, and you'll even see this like in the like intellectual sphere, like what's your boy what's his name, Jordan Peterson, right? He's a psychologist, and he often portrays himself as an expert in other things and winds up saying really stupid things. So that would be an appeal to authority, and to say like blah 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 is true because someone who's an expert in something else said this, right? So like if we're talking about if we want to know whether or not climate change is valid, don't point to a clinical psychologist, right? You look at
agree with that. But also, I think we should foot stomp the fact that you can still take someone who's not an expert in a field and say, hey, this is their argument, and I think that it's valid for these reasons. That's not appeal to authority. You're just referencing the person who had the argument.
Yeah, you can use the argument,
but you can't say it's just true because they're an expert.
Right.
Ultimately, it's the argument. Yeah, it's the argument that makes it that gives a justification, not their credentials.
Right. Which is in part why I was struggling last session, because I didn't really have my own argument there. I was really relying on what was already discussed. But either way, I think that's a good one. And then the other one I was thinking of is a false generalization, which is when you come to a conclusion based off of one subset of data that doesn't necessarily extrapolate to the entire data set, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean,
those are hard because
it is
honestly, like false generalizations, that's like your bumper stickers, right? That's like your political bumper sticker slogans. There's a nugget of truth to it because it may be true in one specific isolated scenario, but it doesn't extrapolate out to the entire system, if you will.
I was gonna say, so like
I see those a lot.
there's a lot of, say that one more time.
No, I see those a lot. False generalizations.
Well, there's a whole lot of different types of fallacies, formal and informal.
Right.
What helps me when I hear an argument, I try to put it in syllogistic form. And there's about 250, or not about, there are 256 forms that a formal argument can make, that can be structured in. Only 24 of them are valid. And for the most part, like if I were to give you the argument, you don't have to memorize the 24 valid forms, but like you can just hear it and you're like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. Well, some people, like my mind works like that. And so, if you know what the valid forms are, any other argument you'd be able to pick apart. You'd be like, oh, this is dumb because of blah blah blah, and you can just explain how something just doesn't necessarily follow because it doesn't fit one of those 24 forms. So,
yeah, and I also think we should point out that in the media today, more so probably than ever, probably more so I would venture to say more so in the legacy media outlets, but some of the tactics that are used there in terms of I guess presenting information in a way that's advantageous for their political gain, what I see oftentimes is either omission, which is ignoring some portion of the circumstance which is contradictory to the position they want to push forward, or what's the other one?
I mean, there's quite a few tactics that media rely on across the board. One would be like hyper-awareism, where it's literally just your main like stem of focus, even though like for instance I'm not going to say that it wasn't the most important thing that happened on 9/11, right? But let's just say 9/11 happened, but also at the same time the Holocaust was going on. But if all you focused on for like weeks on end on every media outlet was 9/11, you kind of tend to forget the other things that are going on, and that's intentional. It's a media tactic. It's called hyper-awareism, and essentially what you do is you just constantly feed into and push an idea or concept at people until it's essentially all there is to talk about. And then of course it spreads because people are like, oh, did you see this new article about this, or did you see this statement about that, or did you see this new fact about blah blah blah. And it's not to say that these things don't necessarily deserve attention. It's just that oftentimes you kind of forget that at any given time the United States is at war, or that we have $17 trillion in debt, because you're too focused on what a political candidate said about his ex-girlfriend, or like, and you're just like, even, oh, like there's way bigger problems that we have in the world today than what this person did in a slip up in a speech. Like it just doesn't matter.
A good example is like slavery in cobalt mines, and cobalt is used in a lot of the devices that we have, pretty much all the modern devices we have, and that's probably, it's probably ignored because of the political interests of the investors into those media corporations, and all the ad revenue and the different folks like Apple and all those people that have power and influence over the kind of journalists that would be honest. And so it's weird.
Well, it's not even that they wouldn't be honest. It's just that you literally have companies and corporations with billions of dollars of ad revenue that they can just plaster in places, including news outlets, by the way, which should just be posting what you would say news, but in between the news breaks to keep the news channel free, all of a sudden now you have giant mega corporations throwing billions of dollars at you as to why you should buy their product. And it's kind of hard to remember that, oh yeah, that company literally has child labor.
Yeah, well, this is actually a really good segue to the Nietzsche topic, because Nietzsche would actually diagnose this as a a symptom or a byproduct of the real religion that's taken place of former legacy religions. Because when you look at the kind of overall like metastructure or substructure, oh, that's another point I didn't get a chance to make. Let me just make this point real quick. Going back to the inherent value argument that was made in like the first, I think it was the first one we did, the inherent value of words.
Intrinsic meaning,
intrinsic meaning. I'm sorry, intrinsic meaning or inherent value. So one thing that when I really thought that through and tried to figure out why we both were at such odds and both so convinced, what I realized is that it was a context issue or a perspective issue. You know, you can look at things from a system or principle or mechanical perspective. Like, for instance, if you say, does language have inherent value? And that's kind of the way I was thinking about it. Or do words have inherent value? That's kind of in the vein where I was saying yes. And then you were saying, well, I can call a clip from a Glock a blah, blah, blah. And it would still, you could still translate value through that. But you don't have to use the word clip. And that's a great example of two different layers of, in my opinion, you're looking at two different layers. You're looking at a system or a model where you have placeholders. You could even think of it as like a workflow, but a system or a model where you have work. So the general statement is, you didn't say this. I would say I was incorrect in my interpretation of it, how you said it. But in my brain, I was thinking, does language have value as a placeholder versus does a specific word in a specific language have value? And of course, you were right in that sense. It doesn't. But I think, and I'm curious if you would agree that, language, in a sense, words and language have inherent value in terms of the conceptual model.
So if you mean intrinsic,
if we're talking about intrinsic,
I still disagree, or I disagree at least.
So would I, because language has a use, but as long as when it stops being useful,
let me give you another example. Using it. Do tools have intrinsic value?
No.
Okay, so it's a definition thing. Yeah, to me, intrinsic is, and maybe I don't have the right definition, but in my head, intrinsic is just inherent value in and of itself.
Yeah, so I mean, like, for instance, like, I'll give you a really good example. Like, there's a really, and we're not going to get into it on this particular episode, but just as an example,
that's fine.
I don't want to actually argue this argument. I just wanted to give you a good example. Gold was the standard for backing money in the United States up until about 1934. Okay, the reason gold was the standard is because gold has what's called numismatic value. A numismatic value means that it can be used for lots of things, especially electronics, which are very important today. So it's a limited resource that has a value that we've assigned to it based off of how useful it is. Whereas Bitcoin is quite literally the opposite of that. It's a hypothetical in which there's no function to Bitcoin in and of itself. If you strip away all the possibilities that Bitcoin comes with, like deregulating banks and decentralizing money, that kind of thing. If you just talk about what Bitcoin is, it's literally just a line of computer code. So in and of itself, it means it's zeros and ones, Right. So it doesn't function as anything outside of itself like gold does. So you would say it doesn't have any intrinsic value.
I would say neither one of them have intrinsic value.
Right, but you would say that gold has an inherent value.
I guess I have to know what you mean by inherent versus intrinsic.
I thought those were synonymous.
That's why I was thinking of like synonymous. But like, I really, really want to get to this.
We should. That would be another good our podcast is just talking about the relationship between all those different things we're talking about, like linguistics in general, but also just the relationship between language and objects in the world and all that stuff. But Nietzsche, so do you want to start that or do you want me to start?
Yeah, well, I just preface it with just a question. So so Nietzsche says, and like you affirmed this last episode, that atheism leads to nihilism, right?
That's
In short,
Yeah,
right?
I did say that, but that's not the complete cycle. That's one less than the complete cycle. He would say that the absence of legacy religion, not in his exact words. I'm going to just,
Hmm.
and this is from my understanding of it from when I studied back in college. So anyone can fact check me on this, but um, that
Either way, there with some middle parts, right?
yeah.
It'll lead to nihilism. Tell me, and why do you think that?
And why do
So
you agree?
the yeah, the reason why he would make that argument is because so you have to understand. I love one of my college professors because he taught philosophy in the context of history, which a
Hmm.
lot of people don't, and I thought that was a really great layer to really understand things. Nietzsche was a product of the Enlightenment, really latent to the Enlightenment. You could argue a little bit after, but he saw the writing on the wall in terms of science had really kind of destroyed religion in a way that no one had ever seen before.
Hmm.
And so his point was that when you take away the worldview that you derive your meaning from, then by definition,
Okay,
um,
boom. Okay, so
yeah,
okay, now I think I understand what you're saying. So if you take away the value, if you take away the worldview that you derive your meaning from, you
correct.
have no meaning, right?
Yep.
Okay,
Now but
okay.
then it goes one step
What?
further, but we can,
So removing God from my worldview did not change where I derive meaning from. Like for me, I'll tell you this. So for me, it just thinking about like there's not some sort of like homophobic sky deity that's controlling everything that I do, has already planned out a course for my life. For me, that would be liberating. Thinking that this guy's going to control every sort of step that I make, or determine where I'm going to go in the afterlife. Like everything's already been decided for me. So in that sense, I would say, well, this is meaningless. There's no point to this. Like everything has already been decided. Like, I mean,
that now you're getting into deep theology because now you're
yeah,
talking
I,
about
I,
the
I
difference
can tell you
between
this.
free will and actually necessitarianism, which is a Spinozan term, but also you can also define it as what's it called?
I,
It's similar to necessity, but
Determinism.
yeah,
determinism, exactly.
because
Yeah. So,
I don't
but
want to put him put him on blast, because if you want to talk about it, he can
well,
like
no,
come
let
into
me
the
just point
show
out.
and okay,
But to what you just said, you picked a couple little variables,
yeah.
but you excluded a bunch that are really meaningful to people. For instance, one of the advents of religion, if you look at the historical progression of religion, is um, there's a couple deep psychological elements to it,
Hmm.
specifically the fear of death and losing your loved ones. I mean, theology provides you with
Religiously
insurance.
contextuous. I would say that you'd probably want to caveat that.
What do you
Some
mean?
some religions actually
Well,
celebrate
let's
death.
Okay,
say,
well,
yeah, let's say
so
Christianity.
okay. Let me see here. Okay, so I'm talking mainly when I speak of theology, and I would say even
Western religion. Yeah, that's fine.
the Abrahamic
Abrahamic.
faiths.
Sure.
Yes,
Sure.
and that's
We'll
what
say
Nietzsche would have.
generically for the rest of the
Sure.
conversation, we're talking
Yeah.
about those.
Yes, yeah, because Nietzsche wouldn't have cared about Buddhism. You know, he would still consider that a lie. But either way,
You haven't
so the
mentioned the
point I'm trying to
afterlife.
make is, but you've got whole cultures, societies, governments, whole fabrics of society that were contrived on these Abrahamic faiths, and it's not a simple thing to just remove that. That was his big contribution to the philosophical world and how
Sure,
he,
but
yeah.
it's not a simple thing to remove it. But what I'm saying is that doesn't. I don't see how that logically follows that life is meaningless. Like I
Well,
like my life has
no.
meaning. Like
That's why
I
I said
okay,
I said we stopped at we didn't get to the conclusion.
okay.
So there's a phase to it, right? First is, oh, we're celebrating the death of God, and this actually was a scene in one of his books, right? And it
Hmm.
was an ignorant scene because, okay, now you have to deal with what's going to replace it. And first comes what he would say nihilism. What's
Hmm.
after that is he would say we're religious beings. Human beings are religious, and something's going to replace that. And that could be worse than what we have right now. We don't know.
I don't.
And
So
so I've seen religious modes of thinking all over the place. I've seen dogma, I've seen bigotry, I've seen blasphemy, all the little components of belief and ideas and acceptance of things without proof and based on faith. I think that's the one of the kind of, I would say, I want to say not hallmark, but it's a specific what's the word for it? It's a specific thing of our time. It's a specific thing that we see in our time today. And I've got friends, and this is anecdotal, but I have friends that are teachers. Okay, they teach middle school and high school, and now they teach at the university level. They're not tenured. But one of the things that one of these teachers told me was he was so surprised at how nihilistic the children were. Like they're nihilistic at a very young age. And so, in order to replace that, you have to find some meaning. You have to derive some meaning, and so
yeah, it
they
can
tend
be.
to go political.
I don't understand like why it can't be internally imposed. Like I give my life meaning.
It's very difficult. I think that's the problem. Is there are people who can do it. It's not like it's impossible. He wouldn't say it's impossible.
So
I think that's I think that's his argument for the will to power, and his argument for the Untermenschen, whatever the name was. But I think the point is that what you got in the 20th century, or I'm sorry, the 21st century, was kind of a prediction of what Nietzsche said from the beginning. You had all these, instead of religion, you just had these ideologies waging war against each other. Whereas in Nietzsche's time, you had the religions waging war. So his prediction was pretty much spot on. Instead of Catholicism and
so how about this? So like,
I mean, you see that translation, right?
Okay,
it's pretty clear.
Well, maybe. I guess it depends how.
Just look at the wars.
Look
at the wars in the 19th century versus the 21st century. There was a complete transfer from. Sure,
I don't think, at least not the West, like the side that, for instance, like World War II, the good side, the side we were on allies. I don't think that was founded on like some religious dogmatism. Like freedom just tend to work better.
No, we didn't start the war. The war was started by feudal Japan. You know, I'm not going to go into the different ideologies, but I don't think it was religious dogma versus religious dogma. There was religious dogma versus reason. No, it wasn't religious. That's the point. So if you look at the 19th century, if you look at the history, let's take 300 years. Let's take a 300-year chunk. A large swath of the beginning of humanity from, I would say, the 16th century. You could go back to 15th century, probably even before that. But a large swath of the wars was from the religious sections.
Sure.
So you had Spain, which were Catholic, the English, which were. You understand that?
Yeah,
so what I'm saying is that in Nietzsche, that's what Nietzsche grew up learning and understanding. His point was that when you remove religion, you're just going to get something that replaces it, and that was all of the different political ideologies that took place in the 21st century.
So that's where I disagree with. Like that's what like so there's a lot of like a lot of your Marxist type folk. I
studied Marxism, but I'm not proponent.
Norm.
He got some stuff.
Like,
right,
Norm. I don't know if you're familiar with Huey P. Newton. But like I've read like pretty much every speech and every book that he's ever written, which isn't a lot. He's the guy that founded the Black Panther Party. So he was a Marxist. He was not a dogmatic Marxist. Like he explained his reasons. Like you could read his books and just follow his logic. Whether or not you agree with it, it's not dogmatic. There wasn't like this is a thing that you just cannot question. Like he was just looking at.
Yeah, that's not.
He will look at something and be like, "What's the best way to solve this problem?" And he was thinking Marxist was the best way. For instance, like him being a black man growing up in mid 20th century,
right.
He thought Marxist ideology was best suited for him, the best suited for any sort of oppressed people. So this wasn't religious dogma.
Yeah, but I can make that same argument on a micro scale for religious people too. There's plenty of religious people who aren't dogmatic. They'll explain in depth as long as you can sit down and listen to their theology.
No. So with the religious thing, like they'll say things they literally just can't prove. They can't prove anything there's a supernatural. They can't prove there's a God that's actually saying any of the stuff that's happening.
So the modern
That's
day.
not what's happening here.
So
I'm talking about
hold on.
people just they'll look at a problem and think of the best solution for that problem.
So
they could be reasoned out of it. This is not faith based. This is what I'm saying.
There's a lot of it is faith based. My argument would be the majority. So hold on real quick.
Okay.
There are legitimate trained apologists from the Catholic group of folks, from the I don't know what they call Pentecostal or Christian.
You're talking about, there are professional Christian apologists.
Yeah, like literally they know they can.
I've never been impressed by any of them.
Yeah, but the point is they're not just saying you will take my claim dogmatically. They'll go through Greek philosophy. They'll go through Thomas Aquinas. They have legitimate arguments, and I've heard them. And honestly, I'm not saying they're.
But the arguments are still based on faith, and what I'm saying is with a lot of the political, really. So give me a religious argument that's not based on faith, like God exists or God did.
There's anything. A lot. There's actually some pretty good ones because I had to memorize one in college.
Yeah, so did I. Give me one.
So I'm gonna try to do my best. My college professor would be shaking his head because I can't remember, but
okay.
This one is from. Saint Anselm. It's the ontological argument for God.
Sure.
Okay, so this is a philosophical argument. This is not a dogmatic.
Just give me the argument.
Okay, so the first argument. So the steps are: number one, we know that we can say there's a thing called God. We can say God that God exists. Okay.
Well, are you saying like you could just say the sentence?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. This is philosophical.
Okay.
So it's going to get into just the vernacular itself, right? The idea of God exists in our heads. Now, God.
I already see where this is going. Okay, this
is a legitimate argument.
Okay,
but I'm going to make it because you have to. If the viewers have to at least know that this was a priest from like the freaking 17th or 18th century or something.
Okay, but it sounds like you're going into some platonic like ontology.
It's not.
Which is just
it's not
total
platonic.
nonsense.
It's actually pretty. Actually, it wasn't proved wrong until Kant. Immanuel Kant was, from my memory, it wasn't proved wrong. No, wait. Was Immanuel Kant? Whoever proved that existence wasn't the first order predicate was the one who proved that this argument is wrong. But either way, this is philosophical stuff. This isn't religious. So, I mean, I can make the argument. It's actually pretty simple, but I'll just run through it real quick.
Mm-hmm.
We can say in our heads, God exists in our heads, and we define God as being that which is all powerful. Okay. And then the second part of the argument is, what is more powerful as a being? One that exists only in our heads, or one that exists in our heads and also in reality?
Cool. All right. How about this?
God must exist both because you're driving it based off of the definition. I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying that to say it's not dogmatic. There's plenty of examples, but
I got one for you. Okay. I can imagine the most the supreme banana. Which one's more supreme? The banana that doesn't exist or the one that does?
The one that they have both.
That's what I'm saying. You can make it. You can do this with anything. Spaghetti monster, like zombies, like that's what I'm saying.
Sure, but my point. This
is a bad argument.
My point was not that it was valid. My point was that. And that's just one example, but I think that
I thought your point was that it wasn't faith based.
My point is that they're trying to use, like, I can show you clips of apologists that are using reason to prove the existence of God. They're not relying on dogmatic assertions.
But yeah, and they're failing miserably. So, and that's the thing. So like
and so did the Marxist guy.
No. So here's
you said he showed reason, but you still wouldn't agree with him.
What I'm saying is his position wasn't faith based. So he looked at a problem and he came up with what he thought was the best solution.
You don't think Catholics look at things through reason? It would drive them insane if they didn't.
Okay, can I break one down like a really, really simple thing? And I hate to oversimplify and I hate to overgeneralize, but I'm going to do it for the sake of this argument in this exact instance, okay? But let's just say, hypothetically, that you're a Mormon, okay? If you're a Mormon and you have a massive loss of blood, science and technology will tell you that if you get a blood transfusion, that will save your life. However, if you're a Mormon, you're not allowed to take blood from other people in any form, which means that you cannot have blood transfusions according to their religion and ideology. Do you think someone who's at the potential risk of dying because of blood loss in a religious situation, being a Mormon, is going to follow faith or going to follow fact? Because if you take one on faith, which is the, like, if you say, what is the better outcome? The question is, what do you assume the ideal outcome is? Because if it's to continue living, then it's not what his religion says, which he's taking on faith. It's what science says, which is that if you don't have enough blood, you're going to die.
Yeah, I would just point to the vaccine for a counter argument there.
I don't see how it has anything to do with what I just
because
said.
It became a faith-based decision, not based on science.
So what I'm saying is, in the situation in which science says that without enough blood, you're going to die, like you're well aware that if you start draining your blood, you're going to die in a pretty quick amount of time.
We're drawing a parallel between two groups of folks. Okay?
No. I'm giving you an example of a religious person that has a choice to make between science, which will ultimately save their life, and their religion based on faith. Because if their God exists and he's all powerful, he can do whatever he wants and that guy won't die. However, if he just gave up that instance of his faith and took science and said, I'm going to accept this blood because I know it will save my life, the God is unnecessary. That's why Nietzsche said God is dead, because science was replacing God.
Right, and he was worried about.
And so, in the sense of Jehovah's Witness, Mormons in this case, God can be replaced with a blood transfusion. I know it's one example. I said it was a general example. I want to get your stance is on this. Do you disagree?
No, I mean no, I do not disagree. I mean that's a matter of faith, 100%.
So in the instance of the Black Panther leader, when he says, I'm going to go on this because it's the reasonable course of action from my perspective, he's not just doing it based off of some sky daddy told me to. He's doing it because this is the logical conclusion that he's drawn based on the evidence he's been presented. That's the difference in a logical choice and a faith-based choice.
No, I of course we agree that, but the issue I was bringing up is that you characterize you characterize theology as if it's not reasoned through. In other words,
if I say it's reasonable to assume that he's going to live because his God is going to save him, what's going to be your basis behind that reasoning?
Well, I'm not a theologian, but
would you say it's reasonable to assume he's going to die without a long list, without blood?
Of course, because I believe in science.
So would you say it's reasonable that he's going to live based off of his religion?
No.
Right. So you'd say it's faith-based if he assumes that he's going to take that path.
But I'm making a much broader point than that. I'm saying that we're falling into... What I'm saying is that we think we've eradicated religious type thinking, and we haven't. That's all I'm saying. Of course, you can point to plenty of examples where people believe in crazy shit. I mean, there's anti-vaxxers that believe in crazy stuff, and there's holistic medicine and stuff.
You had said like a while ago, you were talking about the wars during the 20th century.
No, but let me get.
I'm sorry. I'm confused to what the issue with what I just said was, because it seems like
there's nothing wrong with what you said. There's nothing wrong with what you said. But that's not the argument I'm making. I'm not saying that there's religious people that aren't being religious and are not being scientific.
No, what it seems to me is that you're saying is that religious people don't make faith-based arguments.
No.
My point is that if you use a logical argument, you typically don't use a faith-based argument.
Well, so
that's kind of counterintuitive.
Yeah, no, so that's
literally the opposite. So reason would be the opposite of faith most of the time.
Well, I don't agree with that, but I can explain why. But it's going to take some time. But so what you just said is 100%
faith for me. I think that would be easier.
So I have to explain my point. It's so hard to explain because it takes some time.
I'd
But
rather.
to,
I mean, just to save some time, could you define faith and
Yeah,
then
I
define
guess. Yeah,
reason?
yeah,
yeah.
so
Faith
faith,
or religious thinking.
yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
that's
yeah.
correct.
So faith would be acceptance without reason, in my
Okay.
opinion, right?
All
And
right.
reason is you're literally going through and you're trying to understand the relationship between science and reason and theology, and that's the muddy water right there. But that's not my
Okay.
point.
So
You guys are
okay.
we're not even in the realm, the layer that I would even be in. We're in a different layer. So when I speak of Nietzsche's, proclamation of the issue with Western society in today's world, I'm at the layer of systems of power. Okay. And when you look at systems of power, and when you look at the media, when you look at politicians, when you look at academia, when you look at the institutions of power, we're not talking about truth. We're talking about power and politics.
So
And that has replaced, hold up, that has replaced previous religious thinking. Truth and reason has not replaced religion and thinking, as if somehow the Enlightenment thought that it would. It wouldn't. Most people are still dogmatic. They don't think off reason. Even people that aren't religious. You know how many people I know in
okay.
colleges that haven't thought of any arguments? They're just like the religious people. I mean, you have just as many people in positions of power and in positions of influence that do not care about truth. They
So
really don't. That's one of the problems we have today. That's what Trump
gotcha.
dealt with. That's what, to a
So
certain degree.
if while
That's the
you
broad statement.
so if all you're saying is that there's always going to be people who don't think rationally, who accept things on faith, then I would agree. But it sounded like you were saying like the institution of power is
The question's
replaced with like religiosity. That for instance, like you had talked about,
where are we moving? Are we progressing in a positive direction towards? And I'm not talking about like biology and physics. I'm talking about power.
So, yes, I think society at large. Yes, I think we are progressing like in a positive direction. It's not perfection, but it's closer to that. Like
we have lower crime levels, and we have better medicine and technology. I'm not sure that we're able.
That's the things that matter most.
Giant majority of society.
Yeah,
Most people's
yeah, that's what I said. That's what matters the most, right?
Yeah,
people
but
are healthier. People
I know, but I know. Well, because trust me, I'm aware of
to like clean water, access to medicine, access to the internet, information.
Yes, but
all these things are progressed. I mean, obviously, the internet didn't exist like 40 years ago.
I'm aware of those things. But I also am aware of the fact that we're hyper political and we're hyper. We are prone to move away from truth.
Do you think we're more political like now than we were like 100 years ago?
I think that the institutions of power. I mean, I think the
power now.
I think so. I mean,
you guys.
Here's the thing. Can I say that? Because like I often
you guys are laughing, but like the institutions of power today are they're no better off in terms of the
this is what I'm saying. So like, because I often hear people say stuff like, like America's.
That's not just me saying that.
Hold up. I hear people say stuff like America's more divided now than it ever has been. Like we literally fought like a war against each other like 150 years ago, right? And then on top of that, if you look throughout civilization, revolutions were like happening all over the place. All the time. You couldn't have a stable government because people were hyper political. But now governments tend to be more stable than usual. Like when a revolution happens, it's all over the news, right? Because it's kind of unusual.
You know what's not on the news? Slavery.
Slavery?
That's not on the news.
Well,
even though there's large amounts of it.
Okay,
probably more than there ever has been in history, according to accounts I've seen. But the point I'm trying to make is,
we were talking about like how people are more political. It seemed like
it's not just more political. They're more.
It seemed to be more political
let me just
when it was more religion than there is now.
I can't explain the argument, guys. At least I need like 10 minutes, probably, maybe even more. So look, if you look at the no, I know we can't. We don't have 10 minutes. We only have 10 minutes left. But I would say, in general. Now, we can all disagree on this. I think that there's disagreement. Well, of course, there's disagreement in academia. This is what's taught. It doesn't mean it's true. Mm-hmm. But the question is when we left, and I would say, man, there's so much to this. Like, if you look at certain data points, we are in a pretty bad position, right? If you look at mental health and suicide, for instance, we have not progressed. Okay, crime is down. That's correct.
Whoa! Really? You don't think suicide has gone? Let's look this up.
Suicide and mental health have gone up.
What do you mean? Like, has improved? What do you mean gone up?
No, I'm saying there's I'm saying that there are more suicides and more
capita?
mental. I'd have to look at it. I just know that
That's
they're higher.
important. If it's not per capita,
That's the
it's more
problem.
people.
There's
Right?
8 billion people now. Just so you
Yeah,
know,
so
100 years ago, there was not 4.
well, but
Like,
yeah, but the well,
you know,
so I no,
the
I
population
look,
is more than tripled in the last 50 years, right?
guys, I understand proportionality, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure the people who publish these statistics understand it too. Hopefully, you guys don't think I'm so stupid that I would make a proportionally
No.
incorrect statement.
No,
I'm saying
just
that
saying, like, you have to keep in mind
yeah,
that, like, yeah, just
I
because
know.
there's like more of something,
No,
like, that
because
doesn't make it
I think
a worse situation.
no, I think that suicides are related to nihilism. I think that people really do feel like there's no meaning in life, and I've seen this across fields, not just in the political field, but aesthetically as well. I think people today,
So
they have no religion, right?
I want to.
Everyone
Can I?
shits on religion today. Let's just be real. I mean, if you're a Christian or Catholic, you're about the most unpopular person in your undergraduate class than anyone else.
I mean,
You don't think so?
No,
I can tell you for sure you're not.
no,
Really?
not our
Yeah,
school.
Because that's funny because like
but
all
also,
the children that are in high school or in college these days would tell you they literally have to hide their views for fear of retribution. I guess
so
when were you guys were in college in the last 10 years?
yeah,
Yep.
we went to Liberty University.
I'm just saying. I'm just
Okay.
saying. I would.
Right.
Of it.
Okay,
But I'm just saying that we're more secular than ever. Can you at least agree on that?
yes,
Society is more secular than ever.
It is more secular than ever, and
Yes.
and just about every metric that you can think of that's positive, it is better now than it was. So, like, it's like I don't want to go into the
Not
suicide race.
suicide.
Well,
That's another thing. And mental health.
No. So I don't want to go into the suicide thing because like.
But that's the heart of nihilism.
I can't find accurate numbers going back. From what I can tell, it seemed it has gone down because it was like 22% last year. Now it's only 21, and it seems to be going down. It was so in 2018 it was 22.8, and then 22.4, and then 21.3. Now it's 21.
It's a common fact that modern society has a suicide problem, and that when you look at and when you look at and there's other issues that they have.
Can I just pause you real quick, just in general? Real quick pause. Do you think that's because we're losing religion?
I think that it's because we've lost value and meaning in life, and specifically in the Western.
And you think religion gives
societies.
People that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I think religion gives people meaning. I think there's a lot of other things too.
The number one rate for suicide in the world is by religious people. Hands down. Hands down. Far and away, the number one committing suicide groups in the world all identify as religious.
I don't agree with that statistic.
I'm. You can look.
I don't agree with it. You know what's funny?
Statistically, what ends up happening is, it's really sad to say.
I had
Jehovah's
Christian
Witnesses typically end up being extremely suicidal because they literally get excavated by their families to get extricated.
That's different.
No.
I mean,
it doesn't matter if it's different. It matters.
It is. It does matter. Rate. No. It matters.
So what you're saying is it matters that literally families get pressured into suicide.
I can slice that into 4 pieces. So first of all, you know what was on my dog tags in the military? Christian. I'm not Christian. Guess what? They'd count me as a Christian if I committed suicide. Second of all, if you're a freaking whatever, I can't remember the religion you said.
Jehovah's Witness. Scotsman's fallacy, but
it's not.
It is. That's literally.
Look,
I don't want to go into the fallacy.
I know I'm the only person on here arguing this point, but there are a lot of people way smarter than me and I'm not saying that means it's true. I'm just saying that you guys have to understand. I mean, this is to say that religious people and not nihilist secular society in modern culture is committing the most suicides is crazy. That goes against everything I've ever seen, everything I've ever read. We have a problem. In Japan, I'll give you another example. Japan had the highest suicide rate back in 2018. Okay, Japan is a very anti-religious. They have Shintoism, which is kind of, it's more of like a Buddhist type religion.
So,
but Yeah, but at the same time, they've gotten to the point where they know that it's not true, right?
Okay,
And that's
so
the problem.
what I wanted to do, so because like with the suicide thing, like suicide is pretty complicated, right? And to try to like narrow it down to the lack of a religion, like to me, it just oversimplifies the problem because there's a lot of contributors like the economy, access to food, healthcare, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
That seems
culture,
to be
new culture. So
yeah,
you could have a good
but it
culture.
things just seem to be far more
Yes.
important
Well, we
than
haven't gotten into
religion.
any of that. That's
Well,
all the stuff I would love to get into if we had more time, because you have to
well,
understand that if you don't, so all these things used to
okay,
be intertwined, and
okay.
they're not anymore. We used to have an extended family. We used to have a culture. We used to have religion. There was
Mhm.
a lot more peace and prosperity when you look at other countries that have different systems of values and everything that they have.
I want,
In the
I want,
modern day society, there's a secularism. There's a single mother. There's a lot of deep depression and sadness. I mean, I don't know. I've felt it. I've seen other people feel it. There's a lot of veterans that get out of the service and feel it. I think that, and I'm not saying that religion's the answer, and neither would Nietzsche. I'm saying that it's difficult to overcome that without some real sense of meaning in the world.
So that's what I'm saying. So like the meaning can just come from yourself. That's so like because like I
I
know a
don't think
guy.
that's true, man. No,
Really,
it can't.
no,
No, no, no,
no,
no,
no.
no.
Hold on. Look, so
No,
I
that's
know.
not what I meant.
Can,
That's
can I
not what
say
I
this?
meant.
I'm gonna say this. Like this is a story. I know a guy. He was a Christian for like his entire life, and then he thought really long and hard about just the logical consequences of Christianity and how it worked. How like God was like controlling everything, and the guy turned into a nihilist. It was like none of it matters because my destiny has already been decided for me. So none of it matters. And it was literally because of the religious belief that was holding that. Then he dropped the religious part. So he's a pretty generally happy dude. His career seems to be going well and stuff, and he's
Yeah, but
just working out for him.
so no, I'm not. So let me correct that statement, because oftentimes it sounds like I'm making a false statement. Of course, people like me and you, people who have the ability to make their own moral, their own ethic and moral. Of course, we exist.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell. I know a lot of people that are mentally very fragile. I hate to say it. And if they didn't have religion, I don't know what kind of person they would be. I'm saying that it takes a lot of effort to come up with your own moral ethic. It's difficult. It's difficult to derive meaning from a somewhat meaningless world. I think I don't know. I mean, I don't know that life has any meaning outside of what we give it. I mean, I don't think you can prove that it has any meaning outside of what we give it. Of course, we can give it meaning, and I have my own system of meaning and values, and I'm sure you do as well. And I'm sure Facade does. But the
Doesn't
point
that
I'm trying to
matter
make
more?
is,
Does that
we
matter more? Like, wouldn't that matter more? Like, wouldn't your meaning be more important than mine, or like some sort of cosmic deity?
well, that's a complicated subject, because there's shared meaning. There's a lot to this. I mean, we don't have any time to deal with this, but yes, when you say your meaning, my meaning, that's the other issue with Nietzsche's perspectivism, because there are actual truths. There are actually shared values that we don't have any control over, that we haven't even talked about when it talks about when we talk about primate fundamental drives, for instance. There's actually a lot of, I mean, if we educated people properly, I think we could derive a culture that would be amazing. I just don't know that we can get there.
So,
I'm not saying that it's not possible. I would love if it were possible. Sometimes I think it might be, but I find ourselves falling into disarray to a certain degree, and I worry that we'll never find that.
This is the what I was trying to get to, like kind of like, I mean, think about it, because you're talking about like, you know, we get rid of religion or God, what do you replace it with? You know, like when you get rid of cancer, what do you replace it with? Nothing. Like you just leave it be, right?
Cancer is not an ideology or a worldview.
Well,
that's a way more complicated.
It was just an analogy. But what I'm saying is, like, it's not like religion is filling some sort of hole that needs to be
It
filled.
is. What religion filled a hole for me.
So,
have you ever talked to a religious person about? I mean,
yes.
Of course you have. Of course you have. So the reason why I say that is because, like, I've made the mistake once. Let me just make this real quick.
Mm-hmm.
I made the mistake once. I had a close friend. His father died. At the time, I was a freaking hardcore atheist person, and I really was convinced that the the prosperity and the value of leaving religion was the best. And I tried to talk to him about that, and it freaking destroyed him. And he never talked to me again. So I just say that because this is very meaningful to a lot of people, and to simply say we can just pull it away from them and they'll be able to derive an ethic. There's a lot of people that don't ever think about stuff like this. The conversations we're having, there's so many people that never think about it, and they need someone to give them a script, almost like a software or something. Like, it's weird.
So that's the problem. So like those are the really dangerous people, because those are the kind of guys like that you say they need a script, they can't think of their own ethic. Those are the type of guys that fly planes in the buildings.
Well, exactly. Those people that fall into leftist ideology, they fall into religious ideology.
So what you want to do is like you want to educate, with skepticism, and it isn't really hard. So like as far as like being able to like come up with a system of morals, the way that
if
people
we could teach it,
behave like this.
So,
it's not even that complicated.
But here's the thing: if we could implement critical thinking, if we could teach Aristotle and Spinoza and all these thinkers in like middle school and freaking high school, and we could teach critical thinking, that'd be great. I don't think anyone would ever go for that. We don't care. We like ideology. That's the point. That's the problem. I didn't learn any of this stuff until I got into college, and I had to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to learn it. No one gives a shit about teaching you actual, real reasoning, critical thinking, because the truth is powerful, and people want to control it. That's why the media tries to control it. That's why politicians try to control it, and everything boils down to an ideology at the end of the day. And replace a religion. I don't see real.
So, here's the thing, because you said like is ideology like a replacing religion, like
that's what happened in the 20th century.
You got to that. So like, do you think Marxism was a replacement of religion?
Do you know? Have you? I mean, it's like you guys don't live in the same world.
No, it's not.
They have statues of Marxists at universities.
Look,
they have polls.
All I'm asking,
you guys don't want to hear about that.
I'm just asking one question. This is not a trap.
And you're saying, why do we care about ideology? Because literally the institution.
No, that's not where I'm going. Like I'm asking, right. Do you think Marxism was a replacement of religion?
I think that Marxism has become a replacement of religion for many people. Let me explain why. It's not just because I think it. It's because I've seen polls where there's a large majority of professors in the departments that really matter for how we think about the world that tend to be far left Marxists. I mean, the Black Lives Matter.
That doesn't.
The founder of the Black Lives Matter movement was Marxist. She stated that herself. Let me just talk about all the forms of power that exist that you're ignoring.
That isn't evidence.
That is evidence.
No. Because you say, "Hey,
we don't care about the Black Lives Matter," which took hold in the United States over the course of months.
Hold on.
The universities,
bro. Okay, listen.
But those are the things that matter.
Okay, sure. I was just asking if Marxism was a replacement of religion. You said yes, and one of the things you pointed to. One of the things you pointed to was you said professors in the higher institutions are leftists. Okay, how did they become leftists? Do you think they were indoctrinated that way, or was it through education?
Just like every other student that comes out of universities that has leftist tendencies, whether it's intersectionality.
You're just cool.
Let me explain.
Hold on.
You could be studying a subject that has nothing to do with ideology, and guess what? As an elective, you're going to get a course, and you're going to be taught about intersectionality, Marxist ideology, some type of form of ideology, and that's going to bleed into your thoughts around the world. About the world.
Sure. Okay, that sounds just like education. So like what I'm talking about is
education first.
Okay, what I'm talking about is
we want you to know.
Okay, so what I'm because you pointed to left-leaning professors is somehow evidence that Marxism has replaced religion. And I was trying to figure out, how did you come to that conclusion? Did you just assume that these professors were indoctrinated?
Well, they're not. So
because
in other words,
they could have just read They could have just read a book, kind of, or just studied economy, right? And just like Huey Newton, and become a Marxist that way. He was not indoctrinated into that. He through his education, through his own studies, the dude got like a PhD in this stuff. through his own studies,
We're talking
came
about
to the conclusion that
we're
was
talking about general population here.
okay.
We're talking about masses of
no.
people.
Let's talk about this one example because you have brought up the professor thing. I'm trying to figure out how this was evident.
It's just a poll. It's just a poll that
so the
Marxism is an
poll,
ideology. It's not science. I mean, there's specific scientific maybe components to it, but it's an ideology.
Sure,
and
but
if you look at modern,
it's not faith based.
Oh, 100%. If you
Really?
actually follow the first of all, I'm not talking about traditional Marxism anymore because that's gone out the window.
I'm talking about traditional faith.
Well, no, I'm just saying that I'm talking about when you look at ideologies, 20th century, right? We're talking about
how
ideas that are ideas that can't be challenged, ideas that cause lots of harm. These are ideas that aren't necessarily true.
Okay, so like not all like in
intersectionality, for instance.
I mean it sounds like you're talking about like Leninism, like when they came
I'm talking about the normal shit you see every day.
Okay, so like dude,
diversity, inclusion, equity, and all that stuff.
I know a few Marxists, and they're all about debate. They're all about discussing. They're all about showing stats and all that type of stuff. So like they're not indoctrinating people. They're educating people. And you can look in this. You can say maybe the argument doesn't logically follow or something like that, or you try to point like to a problem in the argument. Sure, but that's not faith based.
So you're telling me that you can debate the Marxists on their campuses openly without having protests and having them shut down and having them being harassed. The point is that
you can do that in some places. In some places you can't. I mean,
but
also
there's a legitimate.
There's some places where I can't say anti-religious stuff.
When you have an institution of power that has gotten to the point where they are hunting a professor down for basic biology, we've gone too far.
That has nothing to do with Marxism.
It does. That's
what
they're talking about. Intersectionality.
So you say like
we're talking about the power structures.
I called this argument 100 miles ago from the minute we started arguing. And here's the problem that has already happened and that you have both of you, unfortunately, have succumbed to. In that one of you is using the word faith and to say that I live in an apartment and you have to have faith to believe that. And one of you is using faith in, I believe in a God and I can't prove it, but I'm going to believe it anyway. I'll let you guys decide who's who. Really, that's where you're at in this argument. Like, let's be clear.
No one can prove
exactly where you're at.
No one cannot prove there's a God.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That's not. I don't believe that. I mean, I agree with you.
At best, you can be agnostic.
No. What I'm saying is, when Triboulet typically defines faith, he's saying belief without good reason. That's typically what he means. At least if I were a betting person, okay.
But that's what you.
When you're saying faith in these instances, you're saying, "Oh, I went to a college. A smart person said this. I'll believe it. That's faith."
Yeah,
that's what you're saying, right?
Okay,
yeah,
so
right. You see the problem that you're having. This is a straight up breakdown in communication between the two.
No. So let's go back to the thing I was saying about the professors. Do you think the professors are doing that?
Do you believe smart professors are telling students what to believe?
I think that professors are
telling either knowing what to believe.
They're telling them what to think and not how to think. They're saying this is the truth. And we're not going to take any other variables into consideration.
I mean, as a guy,
I know you don't see that.
As a guy with like 2 master's degrees, the indoctrination that I saw was like it was really from the religious side. When I read like the more left leaning books about political economy, I wasn't seeing that at all. Like it was slow. There was holes in there was flaws in their logic, but that's not faith based. If I'm working through an equation and I get the wrong answer. Right, and I say, hey, this is the right answer, but it's wrong. That's not faith. Like I worked it out, but was a flaw in logic. That isn't faith. Do you see what I'm saying?
I understand. No, I agree.
That's what I'm saying. So like these leftists, I totally disagree with them. However, if you read what they're saying, it isn't faith. They're literally just pointing to a problem, and they're saying this is the best way to go about it.
Well, when
that is not faith at all.
Well, so I mean, to me, faith is is both what you said in terms of believing something without reason, but also, and I know you're going to say, oh, I'm redefining my terms, but
Nah, I just called this like an hour ago.
well, no, I mean, look, I mean, to me, I have kind of a broad, I guess, categorization of this, but I mean, one is just believing something without reason, right? That's like the appeal of authority piece. But the other thing is when something becomes unquestionable, if it's dogmatic, that's when, to me, it starts overlapping with religion. I mean, there's a lot of things that
There's a
don't
difference in
overlap.
dogma and faith.
Well, dogma is a symptom of faith.
And
Dogma is an
so-
unquestionable belief, you know, and
here's the thing, because like when I see like some of the like the leftist organizations like around the world in 20th century, so there was like Leninists out there overthrowing governments. Not talking about them, but when you think about Marxists in general, those guys were all about debate. They were doing it all over the place. Like this.
if you think that debate and open discourse in college today is one of the
that's not
pillars
what I
of
was
academic.
saying. Cool. That's not. That's
Yeah,
not
of
what I was
course, in
saying.
the past,
What I was
people
talking
used to
about,
debate all the time.
I was talking about like I was saying the Marxists specifically, because that's why I was asking.
Sure.
Do you think Marxism was replacement of faith?
Well, I'm
And
using it. I'm using it in the contemporary sense. I'm talking about neo-Marxism. I'm talking about the integration of intersectionality and traditional Marxism, class, specifically gender, sex,
so because
race.
there's
That's
nothing,
what I'm talking about.
So like, there's nothing intrinsic to the Marxist system that you couldn't still be religious with. Like yet they have Christian Marxists.
To me, when you adopt an ideology, regardless of what it is, but it tends to be today in modern times, specifically, there's two main ideologies in my view.
Mm-hmm.
One is the religious folks, and I know you would say, well, why is religion an ideology? Well, religion is really founded on the belief in God. Ideology is founded in the belief in ideas. Neither of those two are willing to challenge themselves and actually be scientific, go through the scientific method, figure out where they're wrong.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Like Marxists and capitalists do this all the time. And that's what I was.
If you mean scientific research papers where they're just trying to prove their own points, sure. But if you mean actual contradictory information, I mean, I don't see it. I've actually seen fraudulent papers published in the gender studies field, for instance, in some of their highest level journals.
Sure, there's fraudulent in both fields. So, okay, but like, because you're probably
not on that level.
So you seem to have a problem with ideology. Like,
yes, I do.
So what I care about,
I have a problem with things that are questionable.
What shouldn't matter is the ideology. What should matter is the method. Because what I'm talking about when we see with religion, it is being indoctrinated.
Yeah, I don't. So you're right. I don't have a problem with ideology.
Yes,
let me just make that clear. I like Marxism. Okay, I like Nietzsche and Foucault and all those guys. I like them because you can get a different perspective. What I don't like is when they're dogmatically asserted on people as truth.
Okay, so like that's what I'm saying. Like I'm opposed to any sort of indoctrination, any sort of like indoctrination of like even like scientism. Like if you were to say like there's only like the standard model, there's only 17 particles that make up all of existence or something like that, right? I would be opposed to teaching that to someone like as through like indoctrinating them, right? So like what you do is you break down the math, right? You break down the equations of quantum mechanics. Like you show them the fluctuation. You do all these things. You educate, right? Not indoctrinate. And that's not what's always happening with these ideologies. That's what I would be opposed to. If you're being indoctrinated to accept Marxism or Leninism or any sort of
there's children that are being taught in public schools. I've seen the curriculums, specifically intersectionality, but they're not being taught Christianity anymore because we got rid of that for good reason, and they're not being taught. I mean, if you're a private school, obviously you can do whatever you want, but I'm saying public school children. There are groups of public school children that are being taught portions of intersectionality, and there's also from what I've seen.
So you said
profane,
being taught, and being taught intersectionality
before the age of reason. These are middle schoolers and really.
Okay, so this is kind of weird. So like you said, before the age of reason. Like I mean, I was a pretty reasonable 5-year-old. At least I thought so.
No, there's an age of reason, which is consent.
I wasn't a reasonable 5-year-old.
No, 5-year-olds will believe whatever you tell them most of the time. You could have been more reasonable. I'm not saying you wouldn't, but I'm saying that Out of
Okay.
modern society, science,
Sure.
and everything else has
Okay,
believed
so
in the age of consent, which is
there,
generally considered the age of reason, which is when you can defend yourself from
there,
imposing ideas. You can
I'll
convince a
admit.
child of anything.
So there's a sense of gullibility that,
Like they believe in Santa and things
yeah,
like that.
of course, yeah,
They believe in all
of
kinds of
course,
stuff. I had
there's a
imaginary
sense of
friends.
credulity that comes along with,
So
being
that's why they
young.
like to start young.
No, but okay. When you teach a young child the alphabet, are you indoctrinating them?
What about when you teach them they can be any gender they want to be?
Okay, what about when I asked you the question I just asked? Like, if you teach a kid the alphabet, is that indoctrination? Like,
absolutely not. No.
Okay, why not? Like,
because you're teaching them a tool to be productive in society and be able to learn and read and reason. I mean, what I'm saying is that there are cases. This isn't every state. I would say it's pretty bad in Virginia, according to people that have recently graduated from high school. I had a couple personal trainers and stuff, but also there's I've seen curriculum from different public schools where they force students into intersectional exercises where they're forced to see sex, gender, race, things like that before they're even, at the age where they should be able to even contemplate sex because they haven't
I'll tell you this.
yet.
So, I'll tell you this because when we talk about like some of these left-wing ideas, like somebody in the chat had mentioned CRT. I guess they were talking about critical race theory, and I've looked at like some of the textbooks that talk about stuff like that. And I assume that you're opposed to critical race theory, right?
No. I'm not opposed to critical race theory as a legal practice that looks at the disproportional effects of laws on race, but I am opposed to the assertion that those specific laws are inherently racist.
Okay,
there's a big difference there.
Okay, cool.
Maybe we can talk about that.
Yeah, we could.
That's a whole other hour.
Yeah, we could talk about that. So, what I wanted to say was like when I look at like some of these textbooks, and they seem to merely just be educating them on how things work. Like it isn't. They're not asserting things dogmatically. I mean, they're even backing up the science.
Well, no. So intersectionality is about. So if you want to talk about the actual literature, it's about cross sectionings of power in relation to your sex, gender, race, things like that. And so, and it's very if you take it to its full degree, if you fulfill the intersectionality kind of pursuit to its full extreme, you just get individuals at the end of the day, which is what we have anyway. So it's a false way of looking at individuals based off of cherry picking specific traits that they have, and in some cases those things are true, right? And in some cases they're not true.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that's just collectivism.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm
like
just
looking
saying
at people as like a group rather than like an individual.
That's just one example. The fact that so what we're doing here, we're having a productive discussion. There's respect between us. We're willing to kind of think through things critically. I'm worried that we're not. When I listen to NPR, right? I live in the DC area. I'm sure you too. Yep. I've been listening to NPR for freaking years, right? Recently, I don't hear any discourse on NPR. I hear the same thing day in and day out. I hear them even when they do what's it called? It's like All Talk or All Things Considered. That's what All Things Considered. They don't bring in any controversial not even controversial, anyone with a contradictory opinion, right? That's public radio funded by the public. And I'm just saying there's no diversity of thought there.
I mean, that sounds literally like
that's scary
what was going on with the church, right? That had like these public these state funded church organizations, and there was no diversity of thought. It would literally
that scares me, right? I remember when I used to look to NPR as like the respectable place to go for real discourse. I don't see it anymore. I see a progression towards, people are scared to voice their opinions because they're scared to be, accused of any set of, transgressions.
So it sounds like you're saying. Okay, it sounds like you're saying that my child. Okay, quiet. So it sounds like you're saying like there are people who are indoctrinated into ideas,
There's bubble. Yeah.
That I agree. So, but what I'm saying, it sounds like you're jumping from there to these ideas, or the ideologies are now replacing religion. So I'll grant you this. Well, if someone is being indoctrinated into an ideology, sure, that would be a replacement, because like they weren't reasoned into it. Like there is the method of teaching them is something that I disagree with, right? And somebody just said the universe, I hope 6,000 years old. I hope you're trolling. If not, come on the show. But
well, you let me handle that. I've been in the comments.
I hope they're kidding.
That's not an argument.
I'm handling the comments.
I just saw something in the chat. They're just
I'm handling the comments. You do that.
Okay. So if you're saying that someone is being indoctrinated into an idea, that is definitely a replacement of religion. However, that is not always what's going on. And, when I see like largely with at least like, I mean, I haven't.
But when you look at
as a libertarian leaning person, like, so I'm pretty familiar with that side, but also with the left. And what I see is like I see people making arguments. They're saying, "Hey, this is for society. This is the best way to solve it." That is a reasoned argument. That is not indoctrination. They're saying that they're trying to show a problem and point to a solution.
But I'll give you two examples of what the main issue we have right now. Mm-hmm. We've got Barry Weiss. If I'm pronouncing her name wrong, I'm sorry. Barry Weiss, relieved. Is she not relieved, but self-relieved? Published her letter of resignation for the New York Times because she had not even. I mean, if you look at her historical record, I mean, she seems like a liberal in general, but you know, she wanted to explore more than just the leftist point of view, and she couldn't work at the New York Times. Similarly, at Fox, you had Megyn Kelly, I think is her name. She tried to explore and call out Trump. She was relieved. You have these monoliths of power, both on the left and right, and they're not willing to actually have real conversations. Instead, they give you the result of the journalism that needs to take place. They say, this is the outcome. However you find that outcome in your journalism, I want this outcome. Right bad, left bad, etc. You see it on the right side, you see it on the left side. Yeah, I'm tired of that. I feel like we have to have. I'm
opposed to that. Yeah, like I'm definitely opposed
to that. To me, that's religion. That's not operating off of truth. That's operating off of your political beliefs.
Yes,
which to me.
That's indoctrinated, because you're not using reason. You're manipulating them. You're presenting manipulated data and lies and try to convince them of something.
And I'll call out anyone. I don't care. I have no ties to anyone. I'll call out Candace Owens. I'll call out the right. I'm just as opposed. I don't really care. I've never been political. I've just, I've tried to follow reason and truth, and whatever outcome it is, that's what it is. So, I'm just. That's where I'm coming from. And I think Nietzsche nailed it, because that's what I see today. I don't see truth. I don't see enlightenment, truth, and principles in science. I see the same old shit that's happened for all of humanity. It's power, it's hierarchical structure, which we can talk about the fundamental of primate fundamental drives, because I've listened to enough primatologists to know what we're doing here. It really...
Here's the thing. So, like, when to go back to Nietzsche, when he was talking about how these ideologies are going to replace religion, so for like even
their meaning, people's meaning. Well, in other words, their meaning happens now. Their meaning is political. They don't have a religion. They can't derive their meaning and their worth from their God and their religion and their religious values. Now it's all about ideology and politics, which is what happened in the 20th century. And what's continued on probably more drastically in the last 8 years than ever before in America. And also, we haven't even talked about this. I don't know where this is going to take us. I really don't. I know we think that we're doing good because we have good technology and we have low crime. To me, that's just 2 data points. There's a lot more data points to deal with. And also, you have to think about China's progression. You have to think about, I think specifically China's progression. And I mean, we're still an experiment. This heterogeneous experiment of a multi-diverse culture. This is an experiment. We've only been around for like 260, 70 years. And we haven't even talked about the pillars of power in terms of state, economics, and political. There's a lot to unpack in terms of what we're doing here. I mean, we can talk about the internal struggles and what's right and wrong, but there's a whole other conversation that needs to be had about whether or not we're going to maintain power as a nation state with our internal turmoils, where we can't even have a consistent strategy over 4 years. And so I think that that's a whole other topic too that is worth discussing at some point. But I know we're 25 minutes over, so
They were well over. Or I was gonna give you last word. Oh,
no,
what's
you
that?
you take the last word this time. You always give me the last word.
Well, yeah. I mean, like I was gonna say that, like, generally speaking, I mean, if you were to look at just like any sort of metric that we could measure, like that's good. Like the access to healthcare, access to education, except I'm sorry, MJ. You fine. So, man, my 2-year-old just made me lose my train of thought. So, like, anyway, generally, this point that I was going to try to make was that the society that we live in now, with that is more secular than ever, is better by like almost any sort of metric that you could use. It's like, as far as like the murder rate, access to healthcare, education, all that type of stuff. I mean, look, I mean, you could grow up in a really poor area, like in the United States, and go on and get a PhD. I mean, and the government will pay for it, like through the army and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's just readily available to everyone. And to me, this seems to be through people working together and rationalizing things and solving problems. Like, it doesn't come from religion. It can't come from religion. There's not a single answer that science and reason has come up with that has been overturned by religion. But the contrary is true several times over. And I know you're not religious and you don't think that, but I just want to talk about just like the good that come from a secular society. Like, we don't need, like, I don't think we need some sort of religious system or some sort of deity to give meaning to our lives. We give ourselves meaning by being happy, by intellectual progress, etc. You know, we're going to the stars, man. That's all I just wanted to say.
So the last thing I'll say is,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. I was just gonna do some
just gonna
tidying up. We gotta go soon, but you guys say what you're gonna say. Then I'm gonna just do some like housekeeping real quick.
This will be 20 seconds. I hope you're correct. I know that what you're saying is correct for me, but just because there's a bunch of positive statistics that we can point to doesn't mean that there's an issue with social hierarchy, power, the fundamental drives towards social hierarchy and power, and politics in, besides reason and truth. But I do hope you're correct, because I would like that to be correct. I would like us to be able to create our own ethic and create a better society in the future. That would be my utopian vision, is a society built off ethics and science and humanism. I'm a secular humanist, so that's what I believe. But I think that Nietzsche had a point. I think we're struggling. I don't know we're going to get there. That's kind of the reason why I'm bringing this up, is because we at least need to address it. Not that I really think that it's true, but if we don't keep addressing it, then it may not become true. Anyway, that's all I'll say.
All right, so couple of things that I wanted to address, because chat got kind of really interesting, in my opinion, while that was going on. So I apologize. I got distracted by that, and I was trying to type in that. It's really not a great place to answer questions in chat when they're long or require lots and lots of steps. However, I will address a few things really quick. If you want to come on the show, either Wesley or Christ Brings the Sword, both of you are welcome. You can even come on at the same time. We can get you a link. We'll schedule you. We'll make it happen.
Yes.
Since you're calling me a coward and saying I won't answer the question, the long and the short is there have been observed instances of matter quite literally popping into existence in particle and antiparticle situations. So
Quantum fluctuations. That's what it's called.
It's called quantum fluctuation.
Yeah.
It exists, and we've done our research on it. A little perspective before we hang up, and Morefreeus, you don't have to stick around if you don't want. We really do appreciate you coming on. I just want to tidy this up before you get off. Few things is that both Triboulet and I, Facade, are former Christians. We both extensively. So we're very versed in the subject. And if you come on, you better
Quantum
bring your A
fluctuation.
game.
Google
quantum
fluctuation.
Just Google it real quick.
Google it, bro.
Like, yeah. I mean, the long and the short is, if you're going to come at us and say the Bible is true because I believe it, and the Bible and it's I believe it because it's true, it's going to be a really, really poor argument. We're not going to it's not going to be very entertaining, and it's not going to be very interesting because I can say anything about any book. There is a difference when it comes to things like science because it's observable and testable, and other people can independently verify this information. My answer defies the law of thermodynamics. But
that's macrophysics, bro. You're mixing stuff up.
A quite literal misunderstanding of how macrophysics versus quantum particles interact with each other because they're really, really different. That's kind of like saying, I have a broken bone, and you tell me go to a clown because he'll make you feel better. Well, that doesn't really help. I mean, see, Christ brings a sword. I mean, you can send insults. It doesn't matter. Like, the thing is, you're the coward here because you're unwilling to come on. You literally said you're not going to come on unless we answer the question. That's why I answered it. If you want to come on the show, we can talk about it in person. We can actually have a face-to-face discussion. That's what we're here for. We want to have intellectual discussions. That's what the whole purpose of the show was. If you listen to the first part of this, it was literally our guest asking us kind of about the debate and asking us what we do and like how we handle this. So the question, the long and the short of that is that we handle this by bringing you onto the show and having a discussion with you. And that's our goal. And that's what we aspire to do, is have a genuine discussion on the topic. And if you're unwilling to do that, then we're pretty much done here. So, I mean, like, you can keep lobbing insults. Nonetheless, you and Wesley, if you want to come on the show, email us debatableStream@gmail.com. Message us on Facebook, comment on our YouTube, whatever you want to do. If you want to come on and actually have a discussion. Otherwise, like, your empty words aren't really gonna... Nah, yeah, I already proved I'm an idiot. I'm already proved you don't know how to Google. That's what I proved.
Bro, Google. Okay, Google Hawking radiation. Google the Casimir effect. Right there are both demonstrable examples of quantum fluctuations. That's what's going on. So you should come on the show and we can break this down. This is easy. You're not asking hard questions at all.
Yeah, and to just say. Like, by the way, we don't have a kill switch. We're not going to kick you off. Like, you can just stand there and talk. But like I was going to kind of point this out. We're not going to mute you because we're an infant podcast that has no technology at our backs. How we're streaming right now is a Google meeting. The only way you're going to get muted is if you mute yourself or you leave. But just know we're not going to let you...
episodes. Nobody has ever been muted in the history of forever.
Yep. Also, like, just wanted to go ahead and point that out as well, that, like, literally, we don't mute people. It's just not a thing. So, you're more than welcome to come on. We're not going to mute you. However, we're also not going to let you just run away with the episode. I don't have a kill switch. You literally can leave the meeting at your will. I could end the whole meeting, which would end the show. That's not what's happening. Literally, our guest just left. But you see what's happening? We're still in the show. And by the way, if the guest wanted to, they could join back in because they still have the link to the episode. So if we send you a link, you can jump in and jump out at your leisure. It's really nice. We're not some high dollar show. We don't have any like support or fans. I'm using Google Meet to make this happen.
We got 36 subscribers.
36 subscribers. It's not like we're out here making money and killing it and crushing it. We're here to have an actual intellectual discussion. If that's something you're willing to do, then you can come on in. If that's not something you're willing to do or not something that you want to do, at least right now, then you don't have to. That's completely your decision. We're definitely not going to mute you.
You're not going to get muted. Go back and look at the past episodes, and you can see us, like, three of us over talking each other. Sometimes the guests won't let me get a word in. Like
sometimes
that,
it's the other way around. Like we get passionate about it.
Yes.
It's not by
Nobody's
any
muted,
means a formal
ever.
debate. The whole purpose of the show, like we were talking about at the very beginning, was just to have that intellectual discussion. If you're willing to have an actual intellectual discussion, you're more than welcome to come on. He says, can you send me the link? You just emailed us. I don't see the email as of yet, Wesley. Now that's debatableStream@gmail. Just wanted to confirm. You don't have to brush your hair. You can come on anonymously, just like our previous guest. You're going to call me names. That's okay. We don't care. I'm sure I don't have feelings. You're not going to hurt them.
Put the email in the chat, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Now that's debatable stream at Gmail. Yeah, I don't have feelings, so you're not going to hurt them. But I when I say no preaching, I just want to address that as well, because I said no preaching. What I mean is I'm not going to let you just run away with something just because you have an idea in your head. You know, if you start saying that the sky is green, I'm going to pause you and ask you, like, you and I, we agree that something is green. You and I agree what the sky is. Why do you say it's green? We're not going to just sit there and let you ramble on. I don't mean that, like, if you have a belief or have a system. For instance, one of our first guests was a pastor. So he would agree with you when he says everything he says is preaching. In the instance of that, sure. But we're going to call you out and question as to why you believe what you believe. So you're more than welcome to come on. But just know, I'm not going to let you, neither of us are going to let you just slip by. We're not going to go easy on you. And we're not going to let you preach in the sense of you're going to ramble on 10 minutes just so we can't talk. That's not going to happen. We're going to interrupt you. We're going to pause you. We're going to question you. So bring your A game, because both of us are very, very... No, it's nothing to do with a kill switch. Nothing to do with a kill switch. We have never once cut off a guest. Never. What I did instead, to be respectful to the guest, is I muted myself. So never once have we killed anyone. Never once have we cut off a guest. Never once has anyone ever been muted on the show. You still want to come on? You're welcome. Now that's debatableStream@gmail. It's up in the chat. Come see us. We can actually talk about it. You don't have to show your face. You don't have to, you don't have to do anything. You join into Google Meet. You can just use your voice. But at least we can do it not typing back and forth. We can actually have a discussion if you want to have that discussion. But you ask stupid questions, you're going to get stupid answers. Wesley, Nanology, and Christ Brings a Sword. I appreciate y'all in the comments, on the real. We're small. We're still trying to get our feet wet. Thank y'all. Doesn't matter what you're commenting. Doesn't matter if you're trying to hurt people's feelings or not. Thank you for coming on. If you haven't liked this, give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us a follow. Go watch some of our other videos. Try to take some of our stuff down. We'd love to see you guys. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, email us, send us, we will get you a schedule, because we try to schedule out a couple weeks. And we get you on the show. We try to keep a fairly narrow topic, because obviously, as you see, we rant. Get some Christians in here, Nanology. We appreciate it. On the road, we appreciate it. But we've been ranting now. All right, Triboulet, anything you want to add?
No, I'm good. There's nothing I want to add.
Come on the show. Email us. We will email you back. Both of us have it on our phones, the email to this podcast. If you email us, we can talk. We'll get you scheduled. We'll try to find something that works for everybody. Even though both of us have full-time jobs, we just do this for fun. We do it for fun, and we enjoy it. And we promise you, Christ Brings a Sword. If you come on, you're not going to get muted. Deal? Anything you want to add?
No, I'm good.
Yeah. All right. Well, if any of you guys want, we'll see you soon. I think we have an episode. Do we have one scheduled next week?
I think it's with Joseph Jackson.
If he's still, that should be the 3rd.
Yeah.
On Wednesday. Should be doing one with Joseph Jackson, who's a professing Christian. I'll let you guys decide on that. That's your own opinion. But Joseph Jackson going to be coming on. He has his own podcast. We'll get his link in there. By the way, we usually give guests last word of the show, so that's something we also do. But also, he can promote his own thing. With that, we will discuss pretty much anything that you guys want to talk about. So if you guys want to come on, send us a topic, send us an idea. We'll get you on the schedule. We'll have you on the show. And obviously with our 36 subscribers, it's not like we're super big and we can't mute you or just hang up on you. But we appreciate you commenting. Appreciate you giving us some great feedback in the chat. Great comments in the chat. And we'll see you guys next week.